When was the last time you purchased something and you weren't asked for a tip? Yeah, I can't remember either.
How's everybody doing? My name is Anthony Brian Logan, and today we got to talk about a very interesting topic, and that's tipping in America. And when I say interesting, I mean controversial, inflammatory. There's all kind of arguments on both sides of the issue of tipping. Hey, if you guys don't get paid enough in the restaurant, that's not my fault. I should not subsidize your pay. Then some say, hey man, if you can't tip, then stay home. You can't afford it. You're broke. Just eat beans and rice, all this and that and the third. There's all kind of arguments for and against tipping. And one of the most recent things that has been kind of thrown in the mix is when you go to a place and pick up your food, or you just order something right there on the spot, they will have you pay on this little machine. They'll spin it around and say, okay, it's going to ask you a question. And you know what it's going to be. Are you going to tip me or the restaurant anything for simply coming to pick up your food? What's going on? Now, before I get into it, let's roll some of this video from CNBC. I'll link to the whole thing in the description box. I won't play the entire thing because of time. I'm going to play some of the intro and maybe part of another section of it, and then we're going to get into the conversation. Should you tip all the time? How much should you tip? Is it your responsibility? Why or why not? So without further ado, let's go ahead and roll it.
When was the last time you purchased something and you weren't asked for a tip? Yeah, I can't remember either.
Tipping culture has gotten out of control. I get up to the pay window and she's like, how much do you want to tip? What am I going to tip you for? I'm in the drive-thru.
Now, can I pause right here? I just want to say that I do tip on those little machines. I do. I'm guilty. I'm that guy. You spin the machine around and say it's going to ask you a question, I will tip you. I'll tip usually whenever I can. There's a reason for that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more a little bit later. Let's continue.
Oh my God.
Tips have been on the rise for decades. During the 1950s, people commonly tipped 10% of the bill. By the 1970s and 1980s, that jumped to 15%. Today, people tip anywhere from 15 to 25%. According to one 2022 survey, consumers said they tipped more than 21% on average.
Nowadays, there are people who argue 20% is kind of a cheap tip.
While the percentage that consumers are tipping at full-service restaurants in the past couple of years has remained about the same, in the fourth quarter of 2022, the number of tips provided at full-service restaurants grew 17%. Meanwhile, the tip frequency at quick-service restaurants such as coffee shops and fast food chains rose 16% during the same time period.
I'm not surprised at all, not in the least bit. And I think people understand the situation that's going on right now with the economy and with the inability of restaurants to staff. You go into a restaurant, it's busy, it's people all over the place trying to run around, running with orders. Just, you could tell, it's like chicken with the heads cut off in the restaurant. You could tell what's going on. So you're going to feel sympathetic. You're going to feel like you should tip more, and you probably will tip more. And then there's also the pressure of technology. They put the little kiosk right in front of your face and say, okay, how much you want to tip, that type of thing. Right? Like rather than bringing the check, like there's some restaurants still bring a check, you bring a credit card, whatever. But some, rather than having the check, they'll have a machine, and then they have to put your card right in there, and you could tip right in front of them. So there's pressure socially to tip more. That's part of the reason. But I think a big reason is because people see what's happening in these restaurants and they want to help.
What we're seeing now nationwide is something that is known as Tipflation. At every opportunity, we're being presented with a tablet that's asking us how much we'd like to tip.
In many cases, not only replacing the old-fashioned tip jars that you could feel good about throwing some spare change into, but actually suggesting tip amounts, often right in front of the employee receiving that tip. Not to mention also your dinner date and the dozen or so people standing behind you in line.
That's right.
And it's gone beyond just the tablets. The other day I was using the Hopper app to book a hotel, and it wasn't until I confirmed my payment that I realized my hotel was $10 more expensive. It turns out Hopper assumed I wanted to add a tip, and I had to go back to a prior page in order to opt out.
Tipflation refers to not just that we're tipping more, but we're tipping everyone for everything.
You're being guilted into tipping on something that is not technically a service. It's someone simply doing their job. In those situations, consumers are...
Wait a minute. Wait. I mean, okay, if they're doing their job, isn't that a service? If you're in the service industry, that's you doing a job. So I don't understand how that makes any sense.
Feeling resentful, where do you draw the line?
Okay, so they're going to get into the history of tipping and all this and that. Let's skip forward a little bit to the whole thing about big tech and their role in, I guess you would say, tipflation that's happening right now in the country.
Another reason consumers are tipping more, newer technologies. Kiosks and tablets with 3 large tipping suggestions that pop up on the screen in front of you. 3 options chosen by the business.
Now, like, okay, they played that a little bit earlier. I kind of want to just dive into it right now. Like I said, when they put those screens in front of me, a lot of times I will tip, even if they don't give me any at my table service. As long as I like the place and I want to go there again and I just feel the vibe, I will tip. However, I try to tip more with cash if it's like an at my table service. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. If I go to Starbucks, I don't drink Starbucks, but if I did go to Starbucks or somewhere like that where you pick up an order or you order right there and then they say, okay, do you want to give $1 tip? Maybe I'll tip right there on the machine, but I'm not giving you a cash tip ever. I know that the tip I give you on the machine is going to go to your paycheck. I am just giving you a little bit more in your check. That's really what I'm doing. And I understand that. I think that's okay because I know that there's a really big issue with staff and employees. I feel like my contribution will help that employee stay at their job. If others do the same thing, then that employee can stay and the business I like will stay in business. That's my mindset. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being naive. That's just how I feel about it. And I'm a nice person, so I do things like that. However, I won't give them a cash tip on the whole kiosk kerfuffle. Now, what I will do, here's an example of big tech not really influencing my decision. I was at a restaurant recently in Atlanta, really nice spot. You talking about, I guess you would say 4 or 5 star, something like that, expensive, right? I don't go there to that kind of place too much. Now, after the meal was over with, the bill's high. Rather than giving me a check, they come up with a machine. I put my card in it right there, and then they're asking for a tip. Now, the tip amount is going to be big because it was an expensive bill. I put 0. But see, the reason why I did that is because I wanted to tip them in cash. At a spot like that where they rely on their tips, where they're actual waiters and they're getting paid $2 an hour or whatever it is, I'm going to give them cash rather than having that money go to their check, which is going to be low already from their low hourly wage. You see what I'm saying? And I got to talk about this part. Matter of fact, I'm going to come back. There's more to that video, but I'm going to come back. And I know the whole racial element. Oh, yes, there is racial element there. I know that people have a stereotype about black customers not tipping at all or they don't tip well. I know that exists. So then it's kind of like pressure on me to represent, quote unquote, represent for black people. Okay, I'm a over tip. That does happen. And people know that. They know all the social stuff. And some are going to say, well, you're kind of being manipulated. That's not really a good practice to have. Well, maybe. But I feel like that kind of thing happens in all forms of business to a certain extent. Some of the tipping is a little bit ridiculous. If I'm going to a CVS pharmacy and I'm buying something right there, you're just a cashier, why would I tip you? Hopefully we're not going to go down that road. But if it's a thing like, okay, I go to a food place where I know people are stressed and they're not getting paid a whole lot, I'll go ahead and tip you if that opportunity presents itself. At an expensive place, 4 or 5 star place, I'm a tip and I'm a tip heavy and I'm gonna have cash. At a certain point, as I close, if not for the tipping thing, restaurants would just simply raise their prices very high. And then what'll happen is the servers would diminish in their quality. If you go to a nice 5-star spot and you're getting really good service, the reason is because that server is getting paid a lot of money from the tips. If you remove the whole tip factor, you're going to have inferior service, fewer servers on the floor. That's just what it is. So I just do my part to keep that whole thing floating. Some of the other people that expect tips that probably wouldn't normally get it, I will tip depending upon how often I go there, because they recognize me. I stand out. People recognize me instantly. They know who I am right when I come into a place. If you saw me one time, you see me again, you're gonna know who I am. So I want my reputation to be very solid in that place. Oh, he's gonna come in here, he's gonna be a good tipper, all this and that. I want that to be known about me. So a lot of the reason why I tip is self-serving, to be totally honest. It's self-serving, and I want to see the business continue to flourish by having staff on the floor that have an idea of what they're doing. But I think I'll leave that right there for now. And what say you? How do you feel about the tipping phenomenon and the role of big tech? A lot of these apps and programs and machines they have suggest that you tip X amount of dollars when normally you might not want to. When normally you'd be able to give the tip as you're leaving without any kind of judgment for anybody. Whatever your thoughts on that are, let me know in the comments below. You guys know where I'm at. I am pro tipping. I am a guy that does tip, and I'll tip more or less depending upon the circumstance. I'll tip cash or the kiosk, again, depending upon the circumstance. But I think some people kind of get pressured into it. That's where it gets a little bit murky. The pressuring, the high pressure sales tactics at the counter might be a little bit much. They might want to kind of eliminate that. But I do understand the need for tipping. And if not for that, what would happen is everybody would pay higher prices, not just those who can afford to pay the big tips. But whatever your thoughts are, please let me know in the comments below. And that's all I got to say for this video. If you like what you heard, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.